Hello, I'm Dr. Phillips, and I am going to speak to you today about the Crusades and the spread of Christianity. This is background to a Crusades workshop that will take place on the 7th of November, and you can learn more about the workshop by subscribing to this channel, as well as visiting my website, historymentor.co.uk. The era of the Crusades was contemporary with the high and late medieval period, and both then and now is seen as almost inseparable from it. Crusading affected all levels of society, from the higher nobility to knights down to peasants in the fields, as Christopher Tyerman has shown in his book England and the Crusades. Long after there was any hope of regaining the Holy Land, the practice and idea of crusading both continued and evolved, as Norman Housley has shown in the later Crusades, which follows the Crusade movement up to 1530. One could argue that crusading only ceased with the eviction of the Knights Hospitaller from Malta by Napoleon in 1798, and their reversion to a charitable work. In this talk, I'm going to concentrate on the background to the First Crusade and the motive of the Crusaders. What were the Crusades? They started as an armed struggle between Christian and Muslim forces for control of the Holy Land, but later diversified to fighting pagans in Eastern Europe, heretics, and enemies of the papacy, even if they were Christians. The first three Crusades cover a period of almost 100 years, 1095 to 1192. It was a time when medieval religious enthusiasm was at its height, seeing the reforms of Pope Gregory VII and the rise of the monastic orders in the Latin West, as opposed to individual independent monasteries, most notably the Cistercians. The laity, especially the military aristocracy, wanted to partake in this religious fervour, and in 1095, at the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II gave them their chance. He appealed to the laity to use their arms for the reconquest of Jerusalem. He preached the special sanctity of Jerusalem, mentioned the advance of the Seljuk Turks, who treated pilgrims more harshly than their Egyptian predecessors, and insisted that the work of the reconquest was God's work. He appealed to Christian rulers to cease their squabbles and fight for the reconquest of Jerusalem, promising plenary indulgences for those who took part. Finally, he declared that Christian army was to set out on the day of the Assumption the following year, Thursday the 22nd of May 1096, under the command of the papal legate. There was a precursor for the Crusades in the form of the Reconquista, the struggle between Christian and Muslim forces for control of the Iberian Peninsula, which had been taking place since AD 718 and continued until 1492. In addition, Jerusalem had been lost to the Muslims since 638, so one might ask, why no call to crusade had been issued before 1095? The answer is that there was already a Christian power in the region in the form of the Byzantine Empire, which would previously have resented and resisted any attempt by the Latin West to interfere in Palestine or Syria. From about 650 to about 1050, the Byzantines had stabilized their frontier with the Muslims, and they looked on Western Christians as enemies rather than allies, especially the Normans who had been conquering Byzantine territory in the West. It was not until the advent of a new, more formidable Muslim power that their attitude changed. In 1071, the Byzantines were overwhelmed by the Seljuk Turks at the Battle of Manzikert and lost almost the whole of Anatolia. On his accession, Emperor Alexius I appealed to the Pope for assistance and received a sympathetic response. Gregory VII hoped that helping the Byzantines would be an opportunity for the reconciliation of the Greek and Latin churches, which had been divided since 1054. However, the investiture's struggle intervened and diverted his attention until his death, leaving his successor Urban II to preach the call to arms. What were the aims of the First Crusade? The most obvious place to look is Pope Urban II's speech, made on the 27th of November 1095 at the Council of Clermont. There are 5 main accounts of the speech, those of Fulcher of Chartres, Robert of Rheims, Gilbert of Nogent, Baldric of Bourgail, and an anonymous writer. While they have a differing emphasis, 2 aims appear to emerge from all accounts. The first is the cessation of hostilities between fellow Christians and the unification of Christendom. Fulcher of Chartres reports Urban as saying, "Those who once waged war against their brothers and blood relatives should fight lawfully against barbarians." Robert of Rheims comments on Christians fighting each other and advises, "Stop these hatreds among yourselves." Gilbert of Nogent chronicles Urban as chastising Christians thus, "You have often savagely brandished your spears at each other in mutual carnage, only out of greed and pride." Finally, Baldric of Bourgail narrates Urban as declaring, "You butcher your brothers and create factions among yourselves, appealing for them to unite as knights of Christ." All this suggests that, as much as saving the Holy Land, the aim was to unite a divided Christendom in Western Europe, the implication being that they should unite under the ultimate leadership of the Pope. Furthermore, there are indications that in Gilbert's account that Pope Urban wanted to increase his influence over the Eastern Christian Church, as well as the Western monarchs. He mentions the Mother Church of all churches, that is, the Catholic Church, and asks, does God wish some regions of the East to be restored to the faith against the approaching times of Antichrist? Although Baldric's account seems to negate this by telling Christ's knight to hurry to defend the Eastern Church rather than ensure its submission to Rome, the fact that the call for the Crusade came from Urban II could only enhance the position of the Western Church, especially as those taking part were doing so with the Pope's sanction. How successful was this aim of uniting Christendom, or of increasing the power of the Pope? One indication must be the reaction to the call. Urban's speech certainly had the potency to arouse mass action, much more perhaps than he had expected or wanted. Nevertheless, it is still an indication that the Church had power over the laity and that they looked to the Church for leadership, though as we have already noted, this call to arms met with the laity's aspirations to participate in religious ventures. However, the aim of the Crusade, being totally unified under the strict control of the Church, was not achieved. Pope Urban had envisaged one large army with one military and religious leader. Before the Council of Clermont, Urban had consulted with Count Raymond IV of Toulouse, who he nominated as military leader, and at Clermont designated Adhémar, Bishop of Le Puy, as the papal legate. This aim was fractured due to the participation of more princes than were expected, who would not accept Raymond's leadership. This meant that Urban was forced to appoint a legate for each contingent. As a result, the possibility of a unified leadership giving the impression that the whole enterprise was directed by the Pope vanished. The aim of using the Crusade to increase papal prestige had suffered a setback. The other aim, which is mentioned in 3 of the accounts of Urban's speech, is the recapture of Jerusalem. Robert of Rheims' text recounts how the Muslims were in control of the holy places and instructs crusaders to Rescue that land from a dreadful race and rule over it yourselves, informing them that Jerusalem prays to be liberated. This provided both motivation and justification for prospective crusaders. Gilbert of Nosion's account states that the crusaders must take great pains to try to ensure that the holiness of the city and the glory of the sepulchre will be cleansed, which makes it clear that Jerusalem is the aim. Finally, Baldric of Bourgail's account speaks of the relieving the suffering of the fellow Christians who are oppressed and injured in Jerusalem and Antioch, and other cities along the eastern coastline. This again makes it clear that, at least for the chroniclers a decade later, Jerusalem was the goal. These chroniclers were writing in retrospect, with the particular aim of justifying, indeed celebrating, what happened and providing a pleasing account for their patrons. Only Fulcher of Chartres actually went on crusade, first with Stephen of Blois, and then after his departure with Baldwin of Boulogne. But his account does not cover Jerusalem, because perhaps due to his remaining in Edessa with Baldwin, until the later became King of Jerusalem in 1100. Furthermore, the papal letters calling for a crusade did not at first mention Jerusalem as the main aim, but as in Urban's address to the people of Flanders, the liberation of the Eastern Church. By September 1096, Urban had latched on to the popular appeal of liberating Jerusalem and was promising remission of penance for sins for those who set out for the Holy City, although this was still part of the general liberation of the Eastern Church. It is likely that the recapture of Jerusalem would have been seen as a desirable aim, and one that crusaders could focus their thoughts on. If not the aim of the Pope, it was definitely the aim of the crusaders. Was this achieved? In the short term, yes, given that Jerusalem was in Christian hands after the victory of 15th of July 1099, and the defeat later that year of the Egyptians near Ascalon on the 12th of August. However, given that all the armies had reached, and some even crossed the Bosphorus by April 1097, and that Jerusalem was not regained until July 1099, we must account for this delay as well as asking how they managed to succeed. The first thing to note is that there were three main contingents to the First Crusade. Those led by Bohemond of Taranto, those led by Godfrey of Bouillon, and those under the leadership of Raymond, Count of Toulouse. Of the three, only Raymond seems to have been without ulterior motive, already being rich and able to muster a large force, which is why Pope Urban chose him as the official leader with whom the papal legate would travel. The motivation of the other two is more suspect. Bohemond, described by Hans Mayer as a true Norman rather than a true crusader, who had lost land in the Norman-Byzantine War of 1085 and was out to gain compensation. Godfrey of Bouillon sold his land, including his castle, and burned his boats before he set out in August 1096, which indicates that he did not intend to return. Indeed, he was elected the first ruler of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, although he never took the title of king, unlike his brother and successor Baldwin I. The pursuit of personal gain was at times to put the stated aim of the crusade at risk, and later, in 1204, ended in disaster with the Venetian diversion of the Fourth Crusade to Constantinople and the ransacking of that city. We've had a brief look at the reasons for the First Crusade and the motivations of some of the participants. In my workshop on the 7th of November, I will look in more detail at this and the other crusades. Please subscribe to this channel for updates on the workshop. Please also visit my website, historymentor.co.uk, and the History Mentor Facebook page, where you can contact me personally. Thank you.